Welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast. My name is Ralph Cree. This is brought to you in association with www.bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk. In this episode, I talk to Jeff Salzman, who's kind of a hero of mine. I've been listening to his podcast for about 10 years. His podcast is called The Daily Evolver. And we talk about the three main worldviews out there: traditionalism, modernity, and postmodernism, and how they are working together in the culture wars out there in the world, but how they also work inside us, in our own culture war, inside our own sense of self, and how when we engage with all three of these worldviews and sort of sort out the best aspects of them and push away, maybe not the right word, but try and move away from the downsides of them, the unhealthy parts of them, how this can be really transformative for ourselves and our culture. And it's actually what I would define as a spiritual practice, engaging with the politics, the world of politics, and these three worldviews expands our sense of identity and making us stronger, bigger, more inclusive, and wiser. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. So Jeff Salzman, a great pleasure to welcome you onto the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast.
Thank you, Ralph. It's good to be here.
It's an amazing moment for me because I have listened to your podcast for 10 years. I think I've listened to every single episode and wow. Really loved it. It's called the Daily Evolver podcast. And so I think, yes, what I wanted to explore with you today is just sort of tee up the conversation here, that I very, very loosely define spiritual practice as any activity that expands our sense of identity. So it's a pretty loose, on purpose definition of spiritual practice.
Very good back pocket definition, though, isn't it?
And so, your show is a lot about politics, and I been a kind of, when I was very much a postmodern spiritual seeker, politics was just anathema to spirituality to me, and I couldn't find any place for it in my life, and anyone who was interested in it I thought was just missing the point of life, basically, and that there was this whole kind of spiritual thing which was much more interesting and deep and all that kind of stuff. And then I started listening to your podcast, and I became a politically awakened through listening to your podcast. It's like I'd never found politics interesting or relevant or important or even transformative. And so I listened to your podcast, and I felt myself become a bigger person, and I became literate in these three major worldviews, which we'll go into in a minute, which are represented in the culture wars, which we see at the moment. And as a result of that, I felt bigger, but I also had access to media, conversations, literature from all of these worldviews, which I'd kind of shut myself off from some of these other aspects because I felt if I touched them, I'd become infected. So it's so that's sort of teeing it up. So is there anything you wanted to say at this point?
Wow. Well, first of all, wow, thank you. And I'm glad that somebody was listening. Sometimes I feel like I'm tossing it into a well, but it's great to hear that. And yeah, in terms of politics as a spiritual path, that still is even hard for me to wrap my head around. But it is, and it's where, let's just put it this way, it's where the energy is. You know, I mean, there's a lot of energy there.
Yeah.
And one of the things, you know, I come from an evolutionary view, a view of culture and consciousness evolving or growing, basically. And that the next stage of growth is going to be where we take diversity beyond postmodernity, where it's, you know, defined by liberal values, world centrism, you know, deeply seeing each other, you know, that sort of thing. That green diversity or diversity at postmodernism is still not willing to accept people who live in other worldviews. And I refer to them as world spaces, you know, that there are 3 major world spaces online at the current time. And there are others too, but 3 major ones.
Could you just, for people listening, like describe those, you know, what are those 3, you know, represented in what we call the culture wars? In general,
absolutely.
Please.
Yeah. Well, the first is traditionalism. And traditionalism is seen by the others as ethnocentric. They do sort of like to keep to their own. They have a deep sense of their culture and history, ancestors. It matters what your grandfather did to my grandfather at that stage. It is, or in that view. It's religious, it's socially conservative, and it is, you know, it's the right wing of politics. So that's the one view, traditionalism. Then there's modernism, and modernism drops God. You know, all of that is explained away by science and rationality. That is what really defines the modernists. They're world-centric, not ethnocentric. They are world-centric, I would say, in the exteriors, that is. They're able to see the systems of the world. They're able to mine the iron ore here and make the cars there and have these whole big systems of systems that are, you know, basically the capitalist system. They value individual rights. That is, you know, the American Constitution, the French Revolution, these are the first real institutionalizations of modernist thought. And, you know, they sort of find themselves in the middle in the culture wars. You know, we have the business people who are modern. They tend to lean to the right. We have the academics who are modern. They tend to lean to the left. And that gets us to this third worldview. And that's the worldview of postmodernity. And postmodernity is sort of a reaction to what happened in the first half of the 20th century, where, you know, industry and capitalism and weaponry and science was, you know, put to basically traditionalist goals. Traditionalists tend to want to conquer each other. And here we have modern weaponry. And, you know, the whole thing, the whole idea of one culture being superior to another, or these triumphalist stories of my God or my culture, all want to be wiped away at postmodernity. And so we have people who become very sensitive to each other. The whole world of psychology and the idea of the human psyche, the unconscious, comes online. That's really not seen in earlier, in these different worldviews in the same way. And that sensitivity, multiculturalism, wanting to fix the wrongs of the other worldviews. So, you know, traditionalism tends to divide the world between saints and sinners, people who are with me or against me, good and evil. Modernism divides the world between winners and losers, people who can thrive in the system and those who can't. And postmodernity wants to bring those people into the fold. And so that's why we see, you know, the woke culture, this deep multiculturalism, this extra sensitivity that's baffling to these other worldviews. But it's very real and it's doing its job in postmodernity. So these three worldviews are all online. None of them understand or like the others. And the two, traditionalism and postmodernity, are at war. And so that's what we have.
But the opportunity we all have as individuals is to, well, so that culture war is not only out there, it's inside all of us.
Yes.
And if you think of the psychology of multiple selves, which is quite a popular way of looking at psychology these days, back in Freud's time, there was this monolithic self, but then, now we're sort of softening that up a bit with things like voice dialogue, and then even the scientific study of people that have multiple self disorder, as it's called, where you can have really extreme cases where one of your multiple selves needs eyeglasses and the other one doesn't, or one's allergic to strawberries, and so each of these worldviews have dignities and disasters. In other words, things that are very beneficial to you and things which are toxic. And if you can identify the wholesome, beneficial aspects of that reside in each of these three worldviews, and you nurture those inside yourself, I really believe that you can, it makes you a better person, a stronger person, a bigger person, more fluid. And at the same time, letting in the downsides of these worldviews helps you disembed from them. So, when I was very much solely identified with the postmodernity in my 20s when I was at university, I just had cut off myself off from rationality, and people like the new atheists just drove me crazy. I just couldn't. If I saw a picture of Richard Dawkins, I just wanted to burn it. But then as I kind of chilled out a bit and I got more familiar with the upsides of these three worldviews, I started to listen to, Sam Harris, again, somebody I used to really hate. I started to listen to interviews with him, and I actually eventually became a subscriber to his podcast, using his meditation app, reading his books. Totally enriched my life. I'm not saying that's all I'm into, but it was an entire thing. And then the other thing is that some of the strengths of the traditionalism, which is this very juicy relationship with gods and goddesses, which I kind of thought was quaint and like belonged in my village church, which is full of old ladies and old guys warbling along to hymns and stuff. But I suddenly realized there was this richness which I'd cut off from myself, and actually inside there was a deep yearning for a relationship with the divine, which I've been so grateful to reconnect with that. And it's there's just a couple of examples. There's loads more that we can explore about. Something I would like to go into is what are the upsides of these worldviews, the reasons why, like what's in it for us to actually let these things into ourselves and let them change us, because we're kind of, I think the disgust reflex is a deeply seated biological and psychological reflex that we have. And there are things, it's a bit like that kind of obsession with Satanism and stuff, that if we feel like if we touch something from the enemy, it's going to just colonize us like a virus. And,
exactly.
and I think I want to suggest to people that we are more robust than that. And that the sort of the downsides are what we worry are going to become the virus and consume us. But there's these wholesome aspects which we want to let in too.
Yeah. Well, if we look at traditionalism, that the deep family, the connection, that's very important in traditionalism. And the sense of living in an enchanted world, that this world is not my home. It's their answer to the existential question that modernity and postmodernity don't have any better answers to, frankly, which is, who are we? What are we doing here? Where are we going? What is the point of this? How do we live in the midst of this horror on one hand, clearly, and goodness, truth, and beauty on the other? And so everybody's making sense of that. And what makes sense with traditionalists is the love of Almighty God that is pouring into them. And unfortunately, that comes with the devil too. I mean, this is the stage. It's called the absolutistic, worldview, where it's one way or the other. And so they're fighters. Fighting is a big part of that, and we can see where in traditionalist cultures, traditionalists, when you have a culture that is traditional, those are the cultures who are warring more than modern cultures. Generally don't war with each other. Modern cultures war with traditional cultures, but not with each other, and that's sort of interesting. So there's this fight going on, and so traditionalists will other the other worldviews. I mean, they don't want any part of us. They do not think the sexual revolution was a good idea. They don't like moving away from the family. They don't want to have their world disenchanted. They don't want that. They don't want to forget about their ancestors. They're alive. So there's some deep liquid space in traditionalism that frankly is missing. It is in modern, and postmodern tries to get it back in different ways, but modernity, it gets very arid.
Oh, I just want to say that, we've really got this going on in the UK at the moment, and I see it in America, that the sort of political right or the traditionalists they are really energized. They know what they're doing. They know what they're on a mission. They're coordinated. They've got a real tribal unity, and they are just politically successful. And the Labour Party which is the kind of equivalent of the Democrats for you guys, are really they're broken apart, particularly along these two lines, which hopefully we'll explore in a bit. But and so, just looking at that fact alone, and I think a lot of people on the left couldn't deny that there is something the right is doing correctly here, and they've got this thing because it's working, and they are. I think that someone just summarized recently the Labour Party as kind of, they've just basically had this little period of success with Tony Blair. And then that's been it really in terms of being in power. And you've got to start asking questions like, what? So I think that kind of points to that what you describe as the louche, the liquid, just that kind of, it's almost like a pranic energy.
It is indeed
that we lose if we lose that sense of traditionalism.
Yeah, and it's tied to, we don't call them traditionalists for nothing. It's tied to tradition. And so what they're fighting is a modernist and postmodernist worldview that wants to discount Britishness, Englishness, whatever it is, that sense of being a people. And that does exclude, actually a part of this is the downside of traditionalism. It really, from their point of view, it's like one of my friends told me when Obama was coming on the scene. He said, he's not an American like you and I are, Jeff. Just that kind of thing. There's that's the downside. But the upside is that and this is where, as moving into this a newer, integrated, bigger identity, we want to tease that apart and say, okay, this ethno thing is really tricky, but there's something there.
Yeah.
And there's something, we see it all across the world with the Russians, Hungarians. These people are not going to let their Russianness and Hungarianness go.
And it, as you
explained
say,
away.
It really energizes them.
Yes.
And then you lose that energy, just kind of, it leaks out in this kind of like malaise and nihilism that kind of happens a little bit with the postmodernism. But
yes.
We had a classic example of this recently. Keir Starmer, who's the leader of the Labour Party, there was this kind of push in the Labour Party to have the Union Jack flag in the background, of his promo shots. And they were all a bit squeamish about this. It's like, because their voter base is really split between the kind of like people that are economically on the left, but socially conservative, blue collar working. They're the historic Labour voters, but then you've got this kind of metropolitan London, highly educated professional classes, lots of money, but they read The Guardian and they're into environmentalism. And, they look at the Union flag, they want to be sick. But there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. And I think, so I feel really patriotic. I think Britain is an amazing place. I love this land, the actual land we live on.
Oh my God.
The ocean, the cliffs, the fields, the animals that live here, the vegetation, the tree, just that kind of, but I don't feel the same way about my race. Like nationalism's kind of like tied up with that race idea, which really, I'm not so interested in, that for me, that's not the good bit there. Patriotism is healthy and wholesome. Yeah.
No, that's right. And it's interesting that you talk about the land. And I would say that virtually every culture has that same connection to the land of their ancestors. That's just it's hard to overstate what do you say about that? It's pranic, right? It is, it's energetic. It's happening in the energy fields. And that is, Britain has a great couple islands there, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And we have our sea to shining sea. And, so there's that. And then there's, and this is something that I think we can see if we look at all three of these cultures and try as best we can not to get magnetized and disgusted and repulsed and try to hold them all, is that there is, and I'm thinking about this. I know it's true in America, and it's probably true, and I know it's true in the UK, that there's a grievance story and there's a gratitude story. And the gratitude story is that, you brought on the Industrial Revolution and you created the modern world, and you have the great literature and the amazing achievements of the British people. And that's one thing. And then also the culture you've created, which is, by most standards of human history would be seen as paradise. There's enough to eat. There's, people are peaceful for the most part, by any historic standards, amazing, so great. The downside is all the colonization, in our case, the slavery. And there are, both of those stories are true.
Yeah.
And they're both well told. Now, traditionalists only want to tell the one story. Postmodernists who want to deconstruct these triumphalist stories, thank God, they only want to tell the other story. And,
So forget
both in. I don't know.
So you
practice.
It's sort of, forget all the progress and that's happened with this. It's just colonialism, mic drop. It's just like hey, colonialism, mic drop, everything else is shit. That's like the ultimate poison. And so, what you and I here are saying, colonialism, we know it's really awful, and wouldn't want for that to happen in the future at all, or happen now, and it's like, we can leave that behind, but let's not chuck away, I'm just, what I'm losing here, Zoom, microphones, the internet, enough food, so
Crippling lifespans, enough to
yeah,
eat. I
yeah,
mean, our problem is eating too much.
I know.
What?
I know. Yeah,
I mean, from a historical perspective.
yeah.
So, we want
but
to.
there's also there's a grievance story with all of these worldviews. With the traditionalism, it's it's the bad. The good news is Jesus, the Lord, or Muhammad, all that stuff, and the bad news is the devil. The grievance is all of these other perverted people, polluting our good morals and ethics, and then with modernity, they sort of, I'm thinking, people like Steven Pinker do a really good job of showing the benefits, the abundance, but there's this like kind of religious people are like a mind virus, and these kind of woke people are just rotting all of our minds, and it's that's their kind of grievance story. So, and I think so. I mean, this is one thing I wanted to touch on. The grievance stories is basically to do with fear. With the traditionalism, you've got this sort of satanic, evil influences. Modernity, you're kind of afraid of the all of this amazing stuff we built up over these centuries being torn down by this sort of nihilism of postmodernity, and then the kind of warfare of traditionalism and terrorism, all that kind of thing. And then in postmodernity, you've got the kind of that sort of celebration of multiculturalism and all of that, but this deep fear of this precipice that they feel we're coming towards with environmental collapse and social collapse, and there's so much fear in that. And one of the things that I noticed had changed me when I became engaged with these three worldviews, through your podcast, and doing a lot of psychotherapy over the years and things like this, and connecting with these different parts that are in myself, is a huge, massive fear just evaporated. So it's like I'm not. So I was thinking earlier when you're saying about the downside of belief in God is that the devil comes with it. I actually, the devil is not feature in my life at all. And in fact, I don't really even have a room for evil. And I'm not saying I'm Pollyannish. Life is painful, suffering's real. Disease, death, war, all of that stuff is absolutely horrible, and it touches all of our lives. But I'm just not interested in the devil, evil, all of that stuff.
I think you just hit on, what can we take and what can we leave?
Yeah.
I took God and left the devil too. Because I think that the devil is basically the ignorance and provincialism and smallness that has us, operating in a way as adult children, that we can let go of. And as we continue to increase our appreciation and cognition, really, of other worlds and worldviews and people, and let them in, the devil goes away, to me. But, sounds like something like that for you too.
So, I mean, we're living testimony that can happen.
Thank God, leave the devil.
Don't take our word for it, try it out. So, if we were to kind of shift our gaze to modernity's, good news and bad news story, I think that, there is this worry that it takes a lot of effort and time to build something and it's very quick to destroy it. So, you know, you've built all these social institutions and laws and you know, town planning and all this systemic infrastructure all over the planet, and to throw it all away would be a massive shame, which I agree with. But you know, worrying about sort of religious fundamentalism taking over people's minds. You know, I'm thinking of like Richard Dawkins having those slogans on the bus saying something like, you know, God doesn't exist, so just don't worry, you know, just chill out.
Relax.
Yeah. And, you know, that's on the one hand. And then this kind of worry about, you know, sort of Jordan Peterson is an example of somebody who's very, very, very concerned, almost hysterical. I mean, I like Jordan Peterson, but I think he's gone a bit too far in his kind of hysterical worry about, you know, wokeness and the corrosive nature of that. And I mean, he's worried about totalitarian states and all of that kind of thing, which, I mean, that that worries me if we're heading into that for sure. But I think, you know, there's this kind of overblown fear, maybe. And I don't know whether you know, you and I think we tend to be quite optimistic about things, and people might accuse us of being Pollyanna-ish. But I genuinely don't think this is that. This is not a kind of, yeah, everything's going to be okay kind of blind optimism.
No, I don't either. I think it, you know, if we, you mentioned Steven Pinker, you know, I've yet to hear people rebut his core thesis, which is that life has become progressively less violent, more peaceful, more prosperous over time, relentlessly. And that's actually something that we can notice and factor in. You know, the idea of France and Germany, for instance, or England, going to war with each other. Think about that. What would it take for that to happen at this point? You know, Angela Merkel and Macron, you know, leading the armies through the mud. You know, that's not going to happen, because modern consciousness, which is where, you know, Europe is modern and more postmodern. You have traditionalists too, for sure. But for all of human history, France and Germany fought in one way or the other. I mean, hundreds of times, whether it was tribal or clan or nation, the two big world wars there. So there is something that we can notice and take heart in the sort of trajectory of consciousness, I think, actually, in humanity. And that is part of the relaxation. I don't worry that woke, I noticed that woke has totalitarian aspects. All three of these worldviews have, you know, they're true believers that would just, what if the world was only accept Jesus, or if the world would only become rational, or if the world would only wake up to the oppressions of history and love everybody, then we'd be okay. They all have that story. And you know, I want to appreciate all those stories, but you know, I don't know if I'm sort of lost here, but
well,
you know,
I think so. One concept which is really popular, and when
I'm sorry. I was just going to say there's a totalitarian aspect to all of these, because they want the world to be their way, and they want these other worldviews to be colonized, essentially. But so I want to notice that, and also notice that it's not likely that wokesters are going to turn into Nazis and take over the country or world. It's just, there's too many modern systems, checks and balances, freedom of speech. There's things that have come online in history that, you know, we just went through Trump, you know.
And America is still standing. You know, it was
America is still standing, and 60 out of 60 judges ruled against him, including, I think, a third or more he appointed.
And
You
I
know,
think so.
notice that and take heart in it.
Yeah, I mean, what you're pointing to there is the robustness of modernity. That it survived Donald Trump.
Yeah.
That is something amazing.
No.
And it's so there was this concept which really helped me when I came across it, and it's a very popular one now, but this idea of straw manning. And straw manning being taking the worst aspects of something and then attacking those worst aspects of it and saying, look, I've just smashed this stupid idea. Look how flimsy it is and how strong, what my view is. But you've basically taken the worst aspects of it. It'd be a bit like you and me having a fight, and I'm training. I go to an MMA training camp for like 2 months, and I insist that you don't sleep for 2 weeks and eat McDonald's the whole time, and then we have a fight and I win and I go, look at me. It's not really that much to be proud about. And there's this other counter view of what they call steel manning, where take the best parts of this opposing view you're trying to disprove, take the best parts of it, show you understand it, then dismantle it. And if you do that successfully, then you've really won a victory. And I feel that those two concepts play very much into the way we treat these worldviews out there in the world and inside us. It's like you kind of worried about the straw man.
Yeah. Well, it's what we can. I like that idea of steel manning, actually. I've heard that, but I never heard it explained. And it's the idea that you're identifying the best parts of the arguments of your opponents. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then I'm all for that. I do think that part of what we can do as spiritual practitioners who are using politics and worldviews as a path is to explain each of these worldviews better than they can. Better than they can themselves.
I know, just in case anyone's listening to this and they're thinking like, where's the spirituality in this? I have always been attracted to Tantric spirituality. So mainly through Tibetan Buddhism and the Indian Tantric traditions. And just for anyone listening, Tantra is not about sex. It's a little bit, but the Tantric approach to spirituality is you make use of everything you can to expand your sense of identity. And sort of the traditional view of that is that the Tantrics, they drink alcohol, they use drugs, they eat meat, they have sex, all the things that religious spiritual people are not allowed to do. And then we could expand that now in our current spiritual but not religious climate to Tantrics use politics too. It's a dirty one, like meat and sex. It's like politics too. This is Tantra. This is what Tantra looks like in the 21st century.
Yes. Enter the marketplace. Get in the mud.
Yeah.
I mean, we do fight our way forward. That's the straw man part, I guess. But we're always looking for the flaw in the worldview of the people that is our opponent, and we can find them. I mean, my goodness, they're crazy, these people. But there is something absolutely spiritual as a spiritual practice in taking perspectives, of listening to another person, particularly somebody who you have some charge with, and not making it your job to influence them, but to be influenced by them. What do they got for me?
Yeah. And you can only do
they're bringing to the party here. It's no accident that I'm talking to this person. What do they have for me?
And you can only do that if you're just a little less afraid.
Yeah.
That's the first step. What's the worst that can happen?
That's the system.
Yeah.
I'm going to be fine. if I, let myself into your world. I'm not going to be captured. The door's not going to close behind me,
Mm.
And then I let you in. And then here's the spiritual part, I think, Ralph, is that when we take this perspective and we take this perspective and we take the postmodern and the woke and the MAGA and then this one and the Chinese and the, indigenous and all of them, then at some point, our identity is not so much with any set of perspectives or ideology, but with the space within which these are all arising, all around us, including in our own psyche.
Yeah.
And that's a bigger space of identity. Hello, that's a spiritual practice.
And that brings me back to this thing of the multiple selves, that, we are composed of many sub-personalities, and they are distributed across these worldviews. And one of the great definitions of this multiple selves thing is that you need to use the right self at the right time.
Yes, exactly.
And then your life, your actions become appropriate. And
yes.
so if you go to, let's say you go to a job interview, depending on what organization it is, you need to speak the language of that organization. So, let's say it's a kind of like profit-driven, full-on capitalist organization. You need to speak that language if you want to get that job. If you go in there talking about like Black Lives Matter or Jesus and things like that, you're not going to get the job.
They're all available to me, actually, which is so great. And when they're all available, and when your identity is with the space in which they're all there, then you realize that space itself is intelligent, has an intelligence, it has a loving quality. This is where we get into, I love personifying that into a divinity, And then God tells me what to do. And sometimes I ask my spirit guides, and I don't know who any of these people are. But as a direct practice, I can call on them to let me know which self or which perspective. And I don't even have to do that. They just arise naturally because there's a bigger intelligence at work. Hallelujah.
Yeah. And if you were a modernist and you're listening to that, the intelligence we're talking about in that language is nature, the intelligence of nature.
Yeah.
Scientists are always going on about how intelligent nature is,
Yeah.
And I think there is actually a mysticism that exists for modernists, and I think Sam Harris is a perfect example of that. So consciousness is incredibly fascinating and interesting and mysterious, and you don't have to believe that. So you could roughly say that a lot of sort of tantric Hindus or believe that consciousness is God. So Shiva translates roughly into modernist language as consciousness, and you can be utterly fascinated in consciousness and the mystery of it and the unending. We just keep digging and digging and digging and unearthing more and more and more. That in itself can be a mystical spiritual path without having to believe in a theist. I mean, a lot of Buddhist schools are actually non-theist schools. They're just fascinated in consciousness and mesh very nicely with the modernist thing. So, that's an example of how somebody who's got a very, very strong modernist sense of self can actually tap into that the power of that, and that loosh and the prana of and elan vital of that view, that that kind of awe.
No, right on.
We haven't touched on postmodernity though. We've kind of with this kind of the downside and the upside and the fear. There's the sort of the grievance story and the fear, and why we don't really need to be afraid in the same way, and we can have a bit more trust in the system. So that the good. So perhaps if we dive into the grievance story of postmodernity and sort of perhaps say why we don't need to worry so much about it.
Yeah. Well, the grievance story of postmodernity, basically, postmodern consciousness sees the world as a struggle of power. So they want to deconstruct all of the stories of, myths and religions and ethnic, and that's the idea, at least. And so they want to have so they see a world of power dynamics. And so when they see a world of inequality, and it's not hard to see,
Yeah.
The explanation is that somebody's oppressing somebody else. And the upside of that story is it's generally true. The downside of the story is that it perpetrates a perpetrator-victim sort of dynamic. It can keep people stuck. It will still demonize people in the power structure. The diversity of woke does not include Jerry Falwell or Richard Dawkins, actually, obviously, recently. So it has its own sort of a bubble beyond which it won't go. And fair enough, it's bringing a lot to the party, because what it's bringing is this deep sensitivity. So I want to actually see more deeply than a modernist does into people who have been oppressed. There's still kind of other, and with the modern worldview, with traditionalism, they're sort of the enemy. Postmodernity, I want to bring them in and I want to see them. And I want to see their pain. I want to see the pain of history that arises in them. I want to see all of the karmas, all these, karma is just basically a matrix of cause and effect through time. It's not that hard. It's not that mystical schmystical. And so postmodernity, with its sensitivity, it's referred to as the sensitive self. And so it brings a sensitivity to animals. Mm. It brings a sensitivity. It's the first. It's the worldview that sees not just the world, but modernists want to clean up their countries and their backyards. That's their environmental program, and it works. Modern countries generally are pretty clean. Traditional countries, not so much. For postmodern, they see the whole planet as their home. They're a citizen of the world. And I can remember when I was, I don't know, probably 15 or 16, and I announced to my family that I was a citizen of the world. And they didn't like it. They wanted me to be a citizen of the United States, and the rest of the world, we're not so sure about. There's a lot of trouble out there. So that's the upside of this, expanded consciousness. It is, absolutely. We want to bring in the people who have been left out in the other worldviews when we have that postmodern worldview. Hmm. And the downside is that it too has a totalitarian aspect, as we can see, as, they sort of seek to redress the hierarchies, oppressive hierarchies of history by, in some ways, creating new ones. So, it's always a mixed bag. Every one of these worldviews is full of human beings. I mean, let's just stop there. Mm.
I think that sensitivity it's a really, really, really valuable attribute, but it's so easy to fuck it up. So like I was a super sensitive postmodern spiritual man, in my 20s. You could have blow and I'd fall over. So I'd kind of went a bit far at that point with it and become frankly wimpy. But the kind of the upside of sensitivity is being that canary in the coal mine. That like modernity was streaming ahead with all of this progress, and then postmodernity is sensitive enough to see the precipice that we're running towards, with environmental collapse. And it's like, whoa, good canary in the coal mine, and it's, and that, and inside yourself, if you develop sensitivity, you will develop things like a gut instinct for when danger's coming, or a bad decision, like you're about to get scammed on the internet or something, but you've developed this sensitivity. You're not just kind of plowing ahead with your plan, like, oh, I'm going to do this thing on the internet, it's going to work. But you've got this kind of gnawing feeling, or let's say in a spiritual sense, in terms of your practice, that sensitivity is your antenna for picking up the intelligence of the cosmos, and sensitivity inside your body to all the different subtle energy sensations. Or when you talk about formless sensitivity, or to your own formless consciousness, that's very, very subtle and nuanced, and you've got to be sensitive to pick that up. If you're just, if you don't have that sensitivity, then you're kind of trapped in your thinking mind, which is very much the mind of modernity, and you could never get out of that. So it's, people think of sensitive, oh, that person's so sensitive, it's like, oh, they're too sensitive. Well, yeah, you can be too sensitive, but sensitivity is really, really important. And cultures or people that have not built up a deep relationship with their own sensitivity, they just break stuff, including themselves.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely essential. And I think of it myself, just using myself as an example, and lots of people I know, and I can see it in the culture at large. I mean, it's, sort of one of the back pocket definitions that people use these days is emotional intelligence. But there's others, and it's in a way bigger than that. But when I think of what has happened with Me Too and Black Lives Matter, which are two of the big postmodern emergents politically, I absolutely see women in a different light. My consciousness has been raised about the ways that I sexualize women. I'm a gay guy, and I still did it, and I probably still do, but I see more clearly, and it's just a matter of, I see a woman, and woman isn't the big factor. It's like, I actually see this person, and there's a face, and they're looking back at me, and I see into them. And that woman filter, the windshield wipers continued to, do their work. Same with Black people, same with people of different races and cultures. I'm absolutely more sensitive to them as human beings than I was before Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And so that is, we want to let that in.
Yeah. And I mean, the
culture is letting that in. I think there's a big cultural, emotional intelligence, consciousness is being raised, and it ain't pretty. That's another thing we have to sort of accept, is that the culture war is a real war, and it ain't pretty. And people want to win at all costs, and they demonize their enemies, and it's a nightmare. But and we can also see what's fruitful.
It's a real war within ourselves too.
Yes.
So it's like, an example of that would be, I mean, I live in Dorset in England, and it's like just white people. And when anyone from a different ethnicity, I see them in the county I live in, it's like, I could, all these reactions come up inside me. And because I do a lot of meditation and stuff, I kind of notice a lot what's going on inside me. And I kind of think, well, oh, wow, it's, it's a Black person. And then I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have noticed that. Or is it okay to notice that? Or do I talk? I mean, there's an amazing Ricky Gervais. Do you know Ricky Gervais? He did this series called Extras. And there was this woman who was this kind of like sidekick on this show, and she really fancied this guy who was Black, but she just couldn't stop making references to being Black and things, and it just made it all really awkward. And it was all because she was just so worried about it. So, but that's the kind of maybe the sensitivity spiraling out of control, and you can bring that temper that vicious circle of sensitivity by bringing online the rationality of modernity, or that sense of traditionalism of like, it's okay. This is my land. My family have lived here for generations, and you haven't lived here for generations. Obviously, that's just a fact. It's just the way it is. Let's not beat around the bush. But let's be humans together. But but at the same time, let's not deny the fact that your history is in Africa, in terms of like thousands of years back. Mine is kind of in this, and it's like this. That's not a bad thing. It's bring a bit of rationality to bear on that question.
Yeah, and again, these are things to notice. It's like I'm gay. I don't want that to not be noticed or a factor. But I don't want to be the gay guy all the time. We can, especially when you have a facility in the modern and postmodern worldview, people's history, ancestry, it becomes something that's interesting. It's not dispositive.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, you
don't want to ignore it. You don't want to.
You're not allowed to ask somebody about their family. What's the journey of their family?
Yes.
It's a fascinating story, and in fact, there's an ancient history with people asking with their families, because in Papua New Guinea and African, Somalia and places, all these tribes, when two people meet, they run back their ancestors until they find one that's the same, and everybody memorizes loads of ancestors until you find a common one, and it's like, we're friends, and
I like that.
Yeah, well, I just thought of I mean, in that sense, we can run our ancestry all the way back to these hominids that came out of Africa, and we're all friends, really. If you rewind it, I don't think I can recite
know the whole story of it, but we actually do. The meta story of it is, we here we all are.
I've got an example of a sort of in terms of spiritual practice, how this worldview thing, how I got in a bad situation and how things have changed because of accessing these three worldviews. That in my 20s, I was very, very much identified with postmodernity, and I was studying shamanism and Eastern religions at university, and I became really fixated on and obsessed with the world of shamanism, magic, Aleister Crowley, that whole world. And I got sucked right into it, but I got sucked into it without any teeth. So, I was just like this kind of sensitive postmodern guy, and I got sucked into like a kind of real life Carlos Castaneda world, lots of psychedelics, shamanic practices, really wanting to merge with these ancient and some contemporary shamanic cultures and tribes, and with all the evil spirits and the evil shamans, having battles with evil shamans and all of that kind of stuff. And my whole life wasn't just about that, but this was the worst aspect of my life, was that. And so later, these shamanic psychedelic practices have continued to be part of my life, but I now have the teeth and armor of these other worldviews to take into there. So, for example, rationality and modernity, Sam Harris's mind, imagine that has become like Ariadne's thread for me. Ariadne was she left the thread inside the labyrinth. So when was it Theseus who went, or Perseus who went to fight the Minotaur, could find his way back out of the labyrinth. So rationality has become my Ariadne's thread to get pull me back. It's actually a shamanic thing, you know, of like ascending back along the right path out of the underworld, back to integrate this into your own life. So you come back a whole person, not a broken person. And you know, some of the traditionalist trust in divine intelligence and you know, basically, you know, trust in God. I have got this kind of trust now in just life and nature, the God, this goddess, the system, Mother Nature, all of this stuff, in a way that like that pulls me back when I do these particular types of practices, or even, you know, forget psychedelic stuff. You know, if you get into these states of formless consciousness and awareness and meditation, you know, you can kind of drift off there and become untethered if you don't have these other things to pull you back. You know, and I'm thinking of, if, you know, soul identification with postmodernism, you go into that formlessness, you become totally nihilistic about everything. You know, there's a danger there, and you need some of that kind of wholesome granary bread from the traditionalism and some of that, you know, acidic quality of the rational mind to just bring you back down again, wash off the crap, all this kind of ideological crap you build up around your spiritual practices, wash that away in this kind of bleaching of the rational mind of modernity, you know. So that, you know, for me, that's been a major thing in my life, that a way that I've become more expansive. I've got more tools in my toolkit, more arrows in my quiver, whatever, you know, it's just to deal with situations. And that's why I'm really into this, and I want to promote it for other people, because, you know, just as a survival strategy on the spiritual path, you know, to not become one of those casualties. You know,
one ought not to delve too much into magic and without a rational mind.
Well, I've done it, and it wasn't pretty. I'll tell you, it was horrible.
And of course, both of these systems of thought deny the other. And, you know, rationality completely demystifies and disenchants magic. And yet, what is it? And this is a practice, and this is why I'm just having bodily thrill sensations listening to you talk. What is it to be both rational and enchanted? You know, what is it to see the world both ways, even though they deny each other? And then, of course, to bring the sensitivity of postmodernity in, and the you know, the greater, you know, in postmodernity, we get real curious about the cultures and the spiritual practices of other people, and you know, we can kiss a lot of frogs. I did. I'm glad I did. You know, every one of those frogs turned into beautiful princes, and I love it. So to have all of that going on is, you're just a bigger self. You could deal with more. You understand. You know, it's a far more alive place to be.
I think the way I would answer your question of, you know, what is it to bring rationality and what would you call the other, you know, intuition,
magic, enchantment, myth,
you know, bring those together, is you don't need to solve that like an equation.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, it's like you could say it's a bit like a koan, but that's a kind of a cliche, bit of a cop-out, that bring those things into yourself and then see what happens. You know, that's kind of what my approach to it is, like, not try and figure out, oh, how they all work together and mesh them. Just bring them into your life. You are, you know, I know I've said, you know, that you are, and we are, where everybody is multiple selves. We are also one self too, you know, that you're bring it into yourself, see what happens, you know, and you're, by bringing them into yourself, you're bringing it into one place, you know, one body mind, roughly. There's room inside us for all of these, And, I really, there's a guy called Majid Nawaz who is a British Pakistani guy. He has a radio show on LBC, which I listen to on catch up every week. And he holds a really good space on his radio show. So he has people from all of these three worldviews phoning up. It's like a call-in chat show. But he also gives his own little analysis on politics and stuff at the beginning, and then he opens it up for conversation. And I mean, it's amazing. You can sort of see these three worldviews coming in at him, and he fields it all in a way. And one of his favorite expressions is, "Come on, guys, let's hold more than one thought in our heads at the same time. It is possible." And it's he has a great maxim that he quotes a lot. It says, "No idea is above scrutiny, and no person is beneath dignity." And I think this really applies to kind of what we're saying, that it's none of the people in any of these worldviews are beneath dignity, and that's that kind of like ethical, moral flow, that we're in as spiritual practitioners. But at the same time, no ideas beneath scrutiny. It's like sticks and stones can break my bones, but words that cannot hurt me. It's like we can attack ideas, and no one's going to. I mean, okay, people do die when you attack ideas sometimes, but it's not the status quo, is it?
Yeah, I'm noticing more and more of what you're talking about. What's this person's name again?
Majid Nawaz.
In UK.
Yeah, well, yeah. So he's from Britain. He's British Pakistani.
Yeah, but I noticed the intelligentsia here in the States. Not everybody for sure, and probably precious few ultimately, but there are more and more people who are getting that the people that we thought we could forget about, the traditionalists, and as we create this modern world, and that they're not going to go away, and they're not going to be talked out of their worldview. They will accept, and that they have, like you said, passion and juice that would have them choose a leader like Donald Trump,
or Boris Johnson,
who's obvious a con man. And yet the most religious people, he's the biggest libertine ever, and the religious people love him because he's fighting for them and taking no prisoners, and they feel desperate, and so they're part of the family. They have to be let in, and that there's a realization that it's not about judging other people's worldviews by the calculus of your own. Of course, they don't make any sense by your calculus, but to judge them by their calculus and to let that in. And I'm seeing more and more people getting that, and I'm encouraged by it.
I'm thinking of our own inner traditionalist that embarrassingly pops up every now and again.
Flag and all these.
Example.
Oh yeah, the traditionalists. I mean, the tear that comes to the eye when I see the flag.
Yeah, and then it's like it's like, oh, down boy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but to use a more sort of religious example, it's only in the last few years I've actually been comfortable getting on my knees and praying to because I grew up with God all the time. I tend to use God. I tend to pray to the goddess more than God, just to counterbalance that upbringing. But to actually just, I feel broken right now, and I'm just like a puddle on the floor in front of you, and please help me. It just. I couldn't do that.
Universal prayer right there.
There we go. I just could not do that for years, it felt dirty because it was like that traditionalist inside me was wanting to come up. And, the shadow work comes into this, doesn't it? It's like that, your traditional shadow that you can't bear, that kind of like the one, they say there's no atheists in war, that when, when the shit hits the fan, if you start praying, don't worry about it, don't be embarrassed about it. There's a part of you wants to pray, and that prayer is going to work, whether you're believing in like the magical influence of some deity. Just praying, let's just look at it as from a psychological perspective, just admitting you are broken and defeated. It doesn't matter if you're just howling into the wind, it just that act itself helps you, it's transformative. If you can't let yourself do that, you're not firing on all cylinders.
It's actually an upside of traditionalism. They know how to surrender. They know how to turn it over. They know how to say, I can't do this, I need you. That's really important. And yet our modern self will roll our eyes and, that doesn't exist. That's not going to do anything. And our postmodern self is cringing at this idea of getting on your knees and praying to God,
Yeah, well, it's hierarchical, that's
yes, exactly.
Isn't it? It's like,
patriarchy and all of the stuff that's associated with it, rightly, they got a point. But here we are. And so all three of those selves are activated. And this is the culture, you brought us back to this a number of times, with the culture war that's going on within ourselves. And one of the things about this, the spiritual path of integration is that when we allow each self to be who they are, just let them be. We don't have to, again, judge them by the calculus of the other two. Then we liberate them. And so we can have our little Poindexter modernist who's figuring everything out, and we can have our faithful, devout, part that, is seen and loved by God. And then we can have the critical part that's taking it, deconstructing it all at the same time. Those are no problem having all three of those.
I really like what Steve McIntosh, he wrote this great book, which I imagine you've read, called Developmental Politics.
Yes.
And he says that he describes that having these three major worldviews. I mean, I just say as a footnote, we have mentioned the sort of like shamanic, magical worldview, which is a kind of slightly different thing, but that's not in play in the same way in our society. The culture wars are made from these three main ones. But so he says that these three worldviews inside us are played like a chord of notes. So so someone listening to this might think, oh, right, so I've got to just kind of like blend all of these three worldviews into some amorphous grayness inside myself, like just whiz it all up in the blender. But that's not what we're saying. That you have the vivid, it's like a rainbow, it's one thing, but it's made from these vivid colors. Or a chord is this rich sound that's made from three distinct notes, and you're actually playing music with these three notes inside yourself. You're not making a wall of sound, of just like everything all at once all the time.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's just a terrific analogy. Because what is also added is beauty.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, actually.
Yeah. It's all the things we like about the beauty of nature, that kind of biodiversity, that ecological self that we can become. We're not only an ecology of trillions of bacteria all in our gut and living funguses and all sorts of things that live inside our bodies. We're an ecology of worldviews, and it's enlivening and it's robust. I think that's the other thing is the robustness of it in terms of your own strength of character. You're not like a monoculture that's not resistant to disease. We had
easily exhausted. Everybody's exhausted. You talk to people, they're all exhausted.
Yeah, because because you're being, if you're identified with particularly with one worldview, your buttons are being pushed over and over and over and over and over and over and over every day, all day long. Buttons push, 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 and as you say, it breaks you down. But if you can expand yourself to include these worldviews, if there's a button that's being pushed in one of them, you've got plenty of more rooms in your mansion to just like hang out in, weather that storm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you might even be able to see the point of view of the person who's pushing your button.
Oh, totally. That's it.
It's like, okay. That's one of the, I always loved Trungpa Rinpoche, the Tibetan master who started Naropa, came to Colorado back in the day. And he talked about that suffering is the good news, within reason, of course. But when you're contracting around resistance to a thing or a person, that is a sign to turn towards it and to let yourself be, he would say, obliterated by it. I think that's a little strong, but influenced by it, and not. And so that itself is a practice, and it's not easy. And a lot of this is self-observation, and I watch myself snap back to my preferred perspective all the time, but I don't reify it like I used to. I don't justify it like I used to. I'm not as sure about it. I'm not as sure about much of anything as I used to be. That's sort of, I don't know if that's an upside or a downside, but it's true.
Yeah, and maybe this could be the point, the last point I make at least is, we're not suggesting that you no longer have strong opinions on things. That, for example, I strongly believe that all drugs should be legal. But I can really understand the fear of, say, a traditional take on that, that drugs are bad and they rot people's minds and all that, and that they shouldn't be legal and they're too dangerous and all that. I can feel that fear inside myself, and I respect it, understand it, so but see, if I got into a conversation with a traditionalist about drugs and legalization, one of the core principles of good relationships with people is when they feel safe in your company, like that they can tell that you respect them and that you actually understand them, and so even if in those situations you were saying, they knew that your view was different to theirs, but that they knew that you respected them, and they felt in this kind of it feeds into this postmodern thing of like being seen, by another person, that just like takes down, it just cools down all those like systems in our biology that are just like, we're going to run, or is there a weapon nearby? It's just like chills all that down, then an actual communication can take place. And so, so there is this softening around you become far less ideological, because you understand, you viscerally feel the the fluidity, the multiple perspectives that can be brought to bear on any one thing. But at the same time, some of the people that inhabit this practice we've been describing really well are very, very strong, vigorous people with strong opinions about stuff, and they get shit done. It's not an easy thing to describe. That it's like you've got to kind of do it to believe it. I think. Yeah. People would think.
Actually, well put. You do really.
People would think that if you let all of this stuff in, then you won't stand for anything. You'll have no moral spine or something like that. That's not actually true. It's a bit like that with Tonglen practice, the Tibetan Buddhist practice, where you breathe in all the toxicity of human life and you purify it in your own body, and you just breathe out kind of blessings and benefits to everybody. It's like you look at that and you think, oh man, these people are going to get cancer and all of that, but actually they don't. And the only way you can know that is to actually do the practice. Just do it, and the proof's in the pudding.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Perspective taking. Yeah, the idea of opinion is, I think, a good old spiritual teaching of non-attachment is really helpful here. It's acting with passion and being fully present and caring and putting your whole self into it, and then not being so attached to the outcome is a really, really just, that's a good old spiritual practice that I think comes in handy here. And a part of it is that I do think that, we're talking about a new worldview that incorporates and integrates these other worldviews, is that there's something that is, there's something that is deeply healthy about that. And what arises out of it is that we want all people to be healthy where they are. We're not trying to colonize anybody anymore. Everybody gets to be who they are because we see that everybody's beautiful in their own way. There's exceptions, but for the most part. And every worldview is beautiful. And we want every worldview to be healthy. And there's healthy versions of all of these worldviews. And that there's just a natural integration that's happening because, it's what we were talking about a minute ago. Most of us live our lives, some percentage of it on screen, where we're being bombarded by these other worldviews.
Unless you're on Facebook, where you're just bombarded with your own worldview.
So, again, there's a culture war. Evolution is happening. Evolution is, in some way, we both fight and friend our way forward. If we look at the trajectories of history that Steven Pinker laid out and continues. I mean, what's it going to look like when more and more people are able to operate from multiple perspectives? I don't know, but I'm excited to maybe see some of it. I'm seeing it in myself and with other people. And
I think we can fight the unhealthy aspects of these worldviews,
yes,
whilst befriending the best sides of them.
Yes,
it's like tending a garden. It's like it's just like that.
Yeah.
Inside ourselves and out there in the culture, because we are all connected with there's no sharp division between inside and outside, is there? Our interior is as much made of the exterior, the outside world, as it is vice versa.
Yeah. And I think, if we want to expand even this idea of diversity to include everybody, to include these different parts of ourselves, is really the new practice. And it's absolutely a spiritual practice because it is expanding our identity and liberating us from, basically conditioned mind, patterns of thought. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. Wow, Jeff, that raced by. Time flies when you're having fun.
Oh my goodness.
It's
11:30 here.
Yeah. I love it doing interviews with people in America, because it's like, I'm going to be having supper soon and your day's just started. So people can find your podcast, The Daily Evolver, on, I listen to it on Apple Podcasts, but it must be on Spotify and all the other places.
Yeah, it's on all the podcast sites. It's on YouTube, Daily Evolver. And I have dailyevolver.com, which is my own website. And I think pretty much everything's there, including, some sections on theory and so forth that I think people might find helpful if they're interested in this.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff.
All right. Thank you, Ralph.
It's been a real honor. It really has.
It has for me as well, and a great pleasure. Thank you, everybody. I
made all the music that I use in my podcasts. If you'd like to hear more of my music, please visit SoundCloud and check out my profile, Ralph Cree.